So I just want to be like, when I'm saying T1, when I'm saying singularity, I just mean that maybe it's neural networks or AI. I'm just going to call it AI is capable of performing general tasks that say 40% of the people on the planet can do. You see, so like that might be a little different than what you're using in your terminology. It's
I
capable
see
of
what you're
performing.
saying. Yeah, you're talking about the singularity point. I'm saying that doesn't exist. I'm saying, think about the 1930s. So we might think of that as being a more primitive economy. Well, actually, it was highly advanced. There was a lot of new factories that had been created, a lot of new machines that had been invented. Production processes become very, very efficient very quickly. Well, what does that mean? Well, basically, what that means is you have a bunch of robots doing more of the work for us. The only difference is that they don't look like the robots we imagine in science fiction books, right? They don't look like humanoid robots and they don't look like artificial intelligence, but they're doing a lot of the work for us. We need less people's work.
Okay.
So we already have the robots. We've had them for a long time. The problem is we haven't had the money. We haven't given the money to people to buy what the robots are producing for us. And as long as that's the case, there's no point, where AI comes in and takes over jobs. That doesn't have to happen. AI will take away some jobs, and then we'll use economic policy to create more jobs. And if we've run out of ways to do that with the current policy set, we can always invent new monetary policies to create more jobs. We could have the government employ everybody, right, with a federal jobs guarantee. We could start subsidizing all businesses directly. Like there's no limit to how many jobs we could invent if we made that our goal. And that's just a horrible mistake.
As far as I can tell, labor to live. Somebody must do the labor in order for us to live. So
Yes.
So what I mean is that, and when I say somebody, I mean some human currently. That's not to say that we aren't working towards automating a good deal of it. Some things are very well automated in which very few people are necessary. But what appears to be the case is that sometime in our future, which I'm calling singularity, the necessity for a human being to be in there is different. So I guess when we say when I'm saying labor to live, you're saying that that's something you would challenge today. That you say today we do not need to labor to live.
So the economy always needs some people's work. That's true.
Okay.
If we imagine the economy is operating at maximum performance, so it's producing as much stuff as possible for consumers, right?
Sorry to pause you. I want to be clear. When we say the economy, we're not really talking about the economy, right? We're talking about people. The people need.
No, we're talking about the economy. People are one part of the economy. We're just one part of the economy.
But the economy, not to say that the economy can live without the people, but really the ones who need that labor, right? The ones who need that labor isn't the economy. The economy is just like
it's consumers.
Right.
So consumers, we need goods. Now we're agnostic. Like you could push a button and the machine could produce the goods, or a person could do it. We don't really care. We want the goods.
Exactly.
And so, in order for the economy, meaning the productive resources, right? In order for the economy to produce everything it can for consumers, a certain amount of work needs to go into that machine, right? People need to spend some of their time as inputs to the economy, making stuff to create the outputs. And CMT is just trying to make the case that, it's never the case that the economy needs everyone's work all the time. It needs some people's work some of the time. And just as you can have the problem of there not being enough work, you could also have the problem of there being too much work. And we live in an economy where we are maximizing the amount of time that people put into the machine. We live in a full employment monetary and economic system. We're trying to employ as many people as possible. We're trying to create jobs, right? When what we should be trying to do is we should be trying to create more output, create more goods for people, for consumers to enjoy. And it was never the case. It was never the case that the economy needed everyone's labor. Some people are much more productive than other people. And you can pay them money to motivate them to give up some of that time, that work, to produce goods for strangers. And that's sort of one of the problems that money solves. So a lot of people get this wrong. They're looking at they're looking at a sort of state of the world we have lived today. There's a looming automation that's going to come and take over everyone's jobs. They're missing the fact that today we've designed our economic systems, our monetary systems, to employ everybody. That's literally the goal that's written into the code of the system. It's what we're all trying to do. We're trying to work as hard as possible. And when you're doing that, you're going to be spending resources to create more jobs instead of spending resources to create more goods for people. And that's the whole problem with our system. We're forcing everyone to labor to live when what we should be doing is minimizing labor inputs while maximizing outputs. We should be trying to have the most efficient economy possible. We've sort of set up the economy backwards in a crucial sense.
Yeah, I'm trying to see how you see that as backwards.
Well, I mean, do we want to put more time into do we want to have more work being done, or do we actually want to select work based off of what work is the most productive? Do we want to get the most goods out of the least work possible? If you look at any business, they already operate this way. Any individual business wants to minimize labor costs and maximize consumer output. But on economic policy front, we've targeted full employment, and we've said we're going to stimulate markets with cheap debt and other policy tools to create as many jobs as possible. When employment rate rises, we all applaud. When the employment rate falls, we get very unhappy. And this is only, that state of affairs is only it only even seems remotely sensible when basic income is at zero. And the way that people are getting their incomes are through jobs. When you have a basic income, you don't have to do that anymore. You can just let the economy be efficient, reduce jobs that we don't need, and maximize output instead.
See, I'm going to call this a hot take. Maybe it isn't, but
it's a very hot take. Yeah, I'm one of a very few small number of people in the world who would say that like this.
Yeah, and it's hard to process in a way that makes sense. I would agree with you on the idea that we're trying to minimize human labor for the lower end of the hierarchy, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But I don't know if I'm with you on the if I'm with you on the idea that we don't want to employ people. Not saying, I understand what you're saying, that we are technically, and I agree with you on this, that technically with the singularity, what we're trying to do is get people out of the idea of labor, out of the idea of working. So like I'm in agreement with you on that, but the methodology of getting there, like I don't know. I'm trying to think of what policies. Maybe if we talk about let's talk about a specific policy that you think is the best example of how we are, fetishizing fetishizing the idea of employment, as opposed to efficiencies to remove people from working. Period.
Full employment. So full employment is the ultimate example. So every economist in the world today, people who are in favor of the current economic system, people who are critiquing the current economic system, everyone, orthodox and heterodox economists, assume implicitly that full employment is a good idea. This is an almost universal assumption. It's extremely hard to find anyone who says, well, actually it'd be nice to have more unemployment, right? Everyone says more employment is a good idea. And this isn't just like rhetoric. We've designed policy to do this. So, during the Great Depression, there was a lot of factories, a lot of productive resources, a lot of technology, but there were no jobs. And so everyone was poor. And so our way of solving that problem is we designed modern full employment monetary policy. So we had central banks deliberately try to stimulate the private financial sector with cheap debt into creating as many jobs as possible. And this worked. It works really, really well. The cheaper you make debt, the easier it is for businesses to stay open and hire more workers. And of course, this is sort of good for the economy because it puts more money into the machine. It gives consumers incomes, but only to the extent that they're workers. They're receiving wages as workers, and then they spend this money as consumers. But in order to get them to spend money as consumers, we have to create jobs that markets don't actually want or need. And they only exist because we're using policy to deliberately target full employment as an ideal. And this is mostly done in the private sector. It's not the government creating these jobs. The private sector is creating these jobs.
Can you give me an example of one of those?
Well, it's It's hard to do that because it's literally every job, right? So think of it this way. There's two ways that businesses get money. One is to get profit from to get revenue from consumers, right? And if the revenue exceeds their cost that they pay out, then that's called profit. And this is good, right? We usually think this is a good thing for a business to get their money this way. Like a good business is one that gets a lot of profit from consumers, and a bad business is one that does not, and then it eventually has to close. The other way, though, that you can kind of help businesses along is with loans. So a business, that's usually how most businesses get started. They'll write the business plan, they'll take out a loan from the bank, and they'll pay interest on the loan. And they're not making profit, but they're getting some money to work with in the meantime. So if you're a economic policymaker, you have access to these levers that any individual business or bank does not, and you get to make these decisions. You can say, well, we want more jobs, so what do? Do we maximize consumer spending by giving people more money, or do we maximize the quantity of businesses by making debt as cheap as possible? So, interest rates are low now. They're as low as they've ever been. And they'll continue to be low, right? They've trended downwards because we've made a deliberate effort to make debt super, super cheap. And well, that has a really predictable effect, right? Like the cheaper debt is, the more businesses can stay afloat without profit, right? Without getting profit. So we haven't really just questioned if that's a good idea. We haven't considered the other option, which is, well, actually, we could just grow businesses with consumer spending and profit instead.
Yeah, Derek, are we talking about, are these jobs that you think are created specifically for the purpose of giving people jobs as opposed to, a natural need for that job?
Yes.
And which job is that?
All jobs, and to some extent today. Like a portion of every job is unnecessary because macroeconomic policymakers are pushing every job. We're pushing the economy to produce as many businesses as possible and to hire as many workers as possible. And no matter how efficient a technology gets, we keep stepping on that lever. So it would be pointless for me to go around with a marker and try to draw red X's over any job I thought was unnecessary, because the only way to define an unnecessary job is figuring out which jobs consumers in aggregate spend their money at. That's how we determine necessary from unnecessary jobs. We know that if a business doesn't collect money from consumers, it should go out of business, right? I mean, it's not random. Like there's a purpose for that. The purpose is that job, that business will relinquish its resources back to the economy. And then a more efficient job can come around and put those resources to better use, making things that people actually want to buy. And so because we're maximizing business longevity through debt instead of business output through consumer spending, like we're creating, it's hard to estimate the number of unnecessary jobs we create or categorize them, because that's like the whole economy is being designed to achieve that goal. Whereas an economy that was trying to minimize employment while maximizing output would look very different. It would look like a very, very different economy than the one that we have.
God, okay. So so as far as you're concerned, most jobs are really not necessary.
In our economy, that's probably true, right? Most of the jobs we have are unnecessary.
God, okay.
But I'm not willing to put a number. I'm not willing to put a number on it, because maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's only 10% of jobs are unnecessary. Maybe it's only 20%. We can't know that until we actually try to maximize consumer output instead of maximizing employment.